Cool. We'll start. My name is Sasha. I work at Near Protocol. How many people in the room know about Near? Maybe. Okay, cool. So today we're gonna frame this conversation into adoption and kind of like how do we get from like very early days of the blockchain space, we barely have any audience yet, into the space where we're gonna get to like mass adoption. So we're gonna talk about quite a few themes about different projects, 5 projects that are on panel today. We're gonna talk about fundraisers, target audiences, initial markets that projects focus on, the fundraising experiences to the extent people have experienced that, and things like that. But then we're gonna also open it up for public, for any questions that you guys might have in addition. So why don't we start with sharing your personal experience, why you got into crypto in the first place.
Cool. All right, hello everyone. Can you guys hear me okay? Good? Okay, perfect. So my name's Andrew. I've been in the crypto world, well, personally for a long time, since probably 2012 or 2013 when I bought my first Bitcoin. But professionally since early 2017 when I started a small token investment fund before like ICOs were a household word, but very soon after they became that. And that led to me eventually later that year, we actually liquidated the fund and started a company, me and a couple other people and some of the investors that were backing the fund. We, from the fund, learned a lot about trading ERC-20 tokens on the Ethereum blockchain and decided to actually launch a decentralized exchange on the Ethereum blockchain. So in late 2017, we raised a round of venture funding on top of the existing money we had from the fund and put that into a fundraise for a company, which is called EverBloom, which is the one you'll see on my bio. And we launched an Aetherium Exchange in the following year in 2018 called the EverBloom Exchange. And we did it on top of several different protocols, Ether Delta, which you guys may be familiar with, 0x, and Uniswap. And from then I've been building out an audience, like thousands of people have used our platform. One of the unique things that we provide is a professional user interface, so what you'd see in something like Coinbase Pro, but on top of decentralized protocols, and not just one, but multiple protocols. And that kind of leads me a little bit to why I'm here and why Near is interesting to me, because we don't want to just be an Ethereum-only player. We're very seriously looking at branching out into other blockchains that look promising like Near. And so for me, I'm very interested in DeFi and the whole concept of digital assets, whether it's fungible or non-fungible, and building software to help people trade. So that's kind of my backstory on how I got into crypto and what I'm working on today.
I'm the CEO of Flux. It's a highly scalable open market protocol. Got into crypto through everydap.com, which was a curation and ranking site back in 2017. From there, started Flux Market, which was the first platform for derivatives on startups. That was built on top of Augur, 0x, and Maker. From there, found a lot of problems building on Ethereum, which eventually led us to build on top of Near, and now building this protocol.
Thanks, Peter. Good evening, everyone. My name is Chase. I'm the CEO of Outplay Game. So essentially, you may, when you look me up, I guess, you may see me as the CEO of Alto.io, which is another gaming platform that we're building on top of Ethereum. I started off my journey in crypto back in 2015 when I first bought my first Bitcoin. No, too late, right? Professionally, I was involved in the crypto and gaming space and blockchain and gaming space back in late 2017 when I co-founded a company called Alto.io. So what we were doing back then was building a couple of platforms where game developers can use to create their own non-fungible tokens, ERC-721 and ERC-1155, on the blockchain, as well as a couple of other tools that would allow them to integrate those items into their games. Fast forward to today, Alto is pivoting onwards to Outplay Game, where we're still building platforms, but this time around more of like an SDK that would allow game developers to make their single-player games competitive. So more of like a tournament system with a crypto payout in place. And that's where Near is very interesting to us because of the fact that it provides us with more reach in terms of like which blockchains we can work with. And I think that Near is very promising in terms of the tech that they're providing. And hopefully we could go ahead and make it happen as well. But that's pretty much my journey to crypto. Pass it on to you.
Hi, my name's Canaan. So I got into crypto early 2017. I did my senior thesis on it in college. After that, I was a software engineer at Bloomberg. At Bloomberg, I started the blockchain internal chat room. We had like 800 plus employees. Every day I was like learning about blockchain, talking to other people about it. Wasn't really doing my job. Both my parents are actually out here, entrepreneurs, so I kind of got the bug from them. And Stardust, my company, was actually the third idea I created a pitch deck for and pitched my dad on. Was the only one he liked, so I left Bloomberg and started my company Stardust. We're an easy-to-use API for game developers to create blockchain assets and implement those assets within their game. I say that because you guys all know what blockchain is, but the typical game developers that we sell have no clue what it is, and in my experience and journey, game developers don't actually want to use blockchain. They just want to use an easy way to tap into an ecosystem of value. The word blockchain has too much stigma attached to it there and too much overhead and barrier to entry. Talk a lot more about that. I connected with Near about 2.5 months ago. We actually started building on the Loom SDK. TLDR, it sucked, and now we're on to better things. Talk more about that as well. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jose Tolosa. I think out of almost everyone here, I'm probably the one that knows the least about blockchain. I'm very much a newbie. My expertise comes from a career of over 10 years in asset management, particularly trading fixed income, currencies, commodities, some equities. So I worked on Wall Street for a while and stuff. Right now, what I'm working on is a peer-to-peer betting platform for sports betting. And blockchain, as some of you who probably know a lot more than me, is just a very natural evolution of a peer-to-peer betting platform, right? And so it's one of those things where I'm trying to learn more and get myself acquainted with a lot of the concepts and a lot of the ideas. But having come from that world of asset management, I've seen how inefficient markets are. How when you're trading a bond or you're trading an option, it's going to take 3 days for the whole thing to settle, right? There's going to be so many intermediaries. There's so much inefficiency in the system, and I'm talking about the big financial system, that like it just makes sense that within a few years we're not going to evolve to something where computers are actually taking care of many of the tasks that humans are doing today. And so for something where I'm going to be trading financial assets, in this case currency, it just makes so much sense to implement blockchain. And also because the target audience we're going after is basically anyone but Americans, anyone but the US for regulatory, given the regulatory concerns. It just makes sense to have a centralized approach to having some sort of currency and all those type of things. So that's pretty much why I got involved, and I've been learning a lot from the team at Near, for example. So it's been a good ride so far.
Cool. And also, what was the most counterintuitive thing you learned so far while being in space? Both, I would say, like focus on two things, or if you cannot come up with both, then one thing. What was the most surprising and also the most challenging so far in space?
Okay, so the biggest and the craziest hairy monster that I've had to encounter is regulation, which is just building off of the last comment. Everything in this space is kind of played out in a totally different way than you might have expected it to, right? And so especially dealing with anything that's currency or securities or any of those fun words related. So that's, if we were to roll back the clock a year ago, I was talking about this before, everyone was saying big institutions are going to come into the space, and then that is kind of played out a little bit differently than we thought. We were saying that we'd see like the first licensed broker, probably this year, or like the first ETF approved or this year, and all these things have just been constantly pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. And so you're seeing a lot. That to me has been one really surprising area of the space, in the sense that like you never quite know where it's going to land and how things are going to play out.
So I think the most counterintuitive thing that I learned was we're all in a bubble constantly. It was really difficult when I first started building EveryDApp because the experience I was going for was basically to onboard, new mainstream users into crypto, and I wanted to provide the super traditional, super easy app store. And the one thing that I learned was, unless it's really a 0 to 1 vertical that you're working on, especially in crypto, it's going to be very hard to get mainstream users to actually adopt. And so the test that I always take is I ask my mom to onboard into whatever we're working on. And if she has questions along the way, then we've done something wrong. And that's kind of our view of crypto in general, is we're building on the protocol level, but we think it's really important to really help guide users and developers. And so that's something that we try to do internally a lot, is kind of step out of our own product and say, is the target user there? Can we reach this target user? And what are the kind of stepping stones to get to that point?
All right, I guess I'll add to what Peter mentioned, because that's fairly this very, very similar learning that I've had being in the gaming space for so long. I've been working in games, mobile games and browser games for the last 10 years, and pivoting over into blockchain and gaming, I thought that it was going to be easy for me to be able to bring over whatever it is that I've had in the traditional gaming space, but it wasn't the case. Right? When you're building a blockchain and gaming company, particularly a platform where you're trying to attract game developers to work with you into pivoting their games, traditional games, onto the blockchain, it's rather difficult in as much as it was difficult for ad networks to bring in game developers to put in ads onto their games before it became a thing. And also harder even before for Unity to convince game developers to use their game engine before it became the biggest game engine in the world right now. And so for me, my biggest learning was that adoption doesn't come easy, and it's not a sum total of just what you're doing, but rather a chain of different things that involves the ecosystem, not just what you're building, but rather the blockchain you're building on, or the protocols that you're working with, or the second layer that you're working with. And so for me, the biggest takeaway of that one is that a lot of people in games doesn't really care so much about what you have behind it, as long as it's fun and it's playable. And I think right now, blockchain and gaming is still working on that. And hopefully this year we find a breakthrough, or if not this year, maybe next year.
Yeah, very similar experience being in the gaming space. In college, I was an indie game developer, and I wanted to use blockchain for my game. And so therefore, I thought when I started building my product, everybody else did too. And unfortunately, I was wrong about that. No one wants to use blockchain for their game. That's just the truth. And no one wants to play a blockchain-based game. That's also just the truth. You don't need to know how to use a database in order to search Google. As when you play a blockchain-based game, you should just be able to play the game, not needing to know what the blockchain is in order to have a good time. What I have done kind of with my product to counter that, and something that I've been working on probably over the last 8 months, is designing a product and sales pitch that completely abstracts that away. Really just selling, again, the value that my product brings, like Google sells the value it brings, rather than the underlying technology. Google doesn't sell databases. I'm not selling blockchain. And so that's what I've learned over the past kind of 14 months. And really, I just approach other game developers now as, having a great API for them to use, not any blockchain or scary words that make them run away.
So we were in Coach, but yes, I think it's the complexity. It's the complexity of the blockchain, what is the most surprising thing. Just like everyone else said. In my case, I thought I knew something fairly complex. I understand the microstructure, the regulatory entities, how it works for the financial system, for at least like the institutional side of you're doing trading, you're running hedge funds, you're running mutual funds, all those things. So I would think it would be fairly simple to come in and try to learn how everything works in the blockchain. The truth is that, and it's like everything, right? The more you scrape the surface, the more you find out like there's so many other concepts you just don't understand, you don't know. But to take it back to what many of you have said, the solution is you need to abstract it. Because even if you're very well versed on many of these things, very few people will be. And so that's one of the reasons I really like Near, because I think part of your philosophy, your approach is just to make it very simple for people and kind of like have the blockchain run in the background and not necessarily be front and center. So yeah, like it's a complexity to me. Yes.
Cool. And then we can talk about your target audience. So who is your target user? How do you approach go-to-market? What's your initial market, as well as how you're planning for scale, if it's even like relevant at this point in time?
Great question. So this has been an interesting journey for us in terms of target audience, and for a lot of decentralized finance and just like cryptocurrencies in general. So when we started in 2017, what really got me excited early 2017 when we were working on the fund, and then later when we kind of pivoted into a full-blown company and working on a product, what really got me excited was, this notion that we could be doing capital formation across the globe, and anyone could invest in something, and anyone could participate in a particular economy that they were really excited about, right? And it was initially like a very retail, if you want to call it like kind of like Wall Street-ish in finance terms, a very retail audience of people from everywhere in the world investing in projects that they thought were interesting. I think a lot of people kind of understood the risk that came along with that too, but it was just very like individualistic, empowering thing where we could transact globally, invest in projects globally. And so that, when we launched and we got into the whole decentralized exchange space, was kind of who we were going after. We wanted to make a lot of what was out there at the time wasn't very transparent. It was kind of the sketchy companies. You didn't really know who was behind a lot of the stuff, and I mean on the exchange space. And we wanted to bring like a face to these exchanges to make something that was trustable, that felt professional, where you knew who was behind it. You knew it was like a company that you could reach out to. Instead of just being some shady project. So that was our initial target audience, of kind of helping that core early adopter market. The narrative changed in 2018 a lot in decentralized finance and cryptocurrency, where a lot of people wanted to and thought that institutions would come into this space. And so we spent a lot of time, and that was interesting to us because we felt like it could bring a level of sophistication, it could bring more money into the market, which would create more, volume and more liquidity, and could benefit all these people that had invested early in these projects, right? So we started spending a lot of time in 2018 talking to institutions to see if there was some way to work with them and bring them into decentralized finance and into this peer-to-peer trading and stuff like that. That, I would say, was an interesting kind of journey earlier this year. And last year, in that we kind of thought that would go a lot further than what it did. And just kind of give a funny anecdote, a lot of times we meet with banks and stuff like that, right? And we'd have these conversations with their head of innovation or something like that. And they'd tell us about how they're really curious about blockchain and how they're really curious about cryptocurrencies. But there would always be something that they'd say in the middle where they'd say like, but we also understand that this stuff, the ethos of this whole ecosystem is to get rid of us, right? And so they were saying like, we want to be involved in some sense, but it also it's an industry that's actively trying to remove us from being involved at the same time. So it was a kind of a push-pull there where we weren't, we were kind of trying to bring them in and include them in the target audience of a decentralized exchange, but there was kind of a cognitive dissonance that was happening there. So lately we've been focusing again a lot more on just like the individuals, the early adopters, and the crypto native people, which at an individual level happens globally, but organizationally, institutionally doesn't happen that much, at least in the US. And so for anything that's like company or organizational adoption of crypto, we've been looking a lot more outside the US lately. But yeah, that we've kind of had a journey of our target audience over the last 2.5 years?
Yeah, so we actually announced our protocol this morning. So since 4 a.m., I was in communication with our office in Germany getting everything ready. So our target user, you could say today, is a little bit farther off. But because we're building on the protocol level, we're not going to be directly targeting the user. So this kind of plays back into what I said before, where you really have to guide the community and developers. And so, we're in this unique position where we spent, a year building Flux Market, which was this, platform that was built on top of Augur and other decentralized infrastructure. And the main kind of learning that we got from that is, it's very difficult to predict the killer app, you could say, or the killer use case for our protocol. But the important thing is to really help developers launch something scalable and launch something that can target these, demographics of users. And so that's kind of our main focus right now, is looking at different verticals. Sports betting is an example, esports, weather, niche derivatives, social media influencer forecasting. And so we see our protocol in the end, in the long-term vision, as Google for events that haven't happened yet. And so the idea behind what we're building is to really aggregate a lot of different use cases and a lot of different markets to really use prediction markets to really derive a very accurate forecasting stream. And so our target users are then people in different verticals that I mentioned.
So, being a gaming project, there's usually just two target groups that you would be focusing on, and that's usually the players or the gamers, and sometimes or oftentimes, depending on what you're doing, the game developers as well. So with Outplay, our current target market right now would be game developers in particular, but specifically game developers who are focusing on casual and hyper-casual games, because the whole premise of Outplay is to bring skills-based game into a certain level of competitiveness, where it's a single-player game, but if you are to integrate Outplay into that game, it allows it to become a tournament with a group of people pulling in to join a specific tournament, or for you to duel or to compete with another player playing that same game. So it could be any game, a leaderboard game, the fastest time, as long as there's skills involved in playing the game, that's where we come in. And so in terms of trying to scale, right now, if you look into the data, there's about 2.4 billion gamers that are playing games right now, and maybe about 100 to 200 million of these gamers are playing hyper-casual games or casual games. And so if you look into casual games right now, we are basically targeting game developers who are very interested in turning their games from a single-player game of skill to a multiplayer game or a tournament. And so hopefully we get to attract these audiences by making sure that there is an incentive for them to allow tournaments to come into their games. One of the biggest issues gaming is experiencing right now is user onboarding, and it comes in two different schools of thought, particularly on blockchain and crypto. Most of the gaming projects that are in blockchain and crypto right now are focusing on the existing players or gamers that are already knowledgeable in crypto. And there's a couple of gaming projects that are focusing on bringing in users that are not so knowledgeable in crypto just yet, or have zero knowledge in crypto, and bringing them into the game, and then eventually introducing them into the blockchain when the time is right. So which means that as a game, we need to create an environment where they don't really need to understand crypto. There is education that is in place when they're playing the game about what it is or what it takes for them to be able to bring these centralized items into a decentralized world. And so right now it's a bit of a challenge. Onboarding is a bit of a challenge, and this is something I think Stardust is also thinking of as they move along with their projects, including having more people in place, whether it's on the crypto side of things or on the traditional gaming side of things.
Thanks. Yeah, Another gaming project here. So we're definitely targeted at the game developers. Actually, 3 out of the 5 kind of game studios we have coming on board right now don't know what blockchain is. And so a lot of people say to me, well, aren't blockchain, quote, unquote, games, I'll say, triple quotes around those, aren't they the lowest hanging fruit out there? And I say, no, because my API pretty much displaces their whole team, which is the truth of the matter. In the industry today, people aren't building games on the blockchain, they're building some sort of collectible pyramid schemes. And so to actually target game developers and give them an API and an ecosystem to tap into of the blockchain is where we go directly to those. You think we know Fortnite, CSGO, League of Legends, they all have the capabilities to build marketplaces, decentralized trading logic, game explorers, all these things. Indie developers don't, and so that's who we're primarily targeted toward, is providing value for those developers. And I think that's pretty much it.
Cool. Any soccer fans here? No? Yeah. There you go. Great. So we're going for long-term sports fans globally. The medium-term goal is to capture everyone that's going to watch the FIFA World Cup in 2022. We want to sign them up. Short-term, right now we only have a beta test. We have 20 users. What we're doing, we're having them predict Champions League games. It's going well so far. We've got, over the span of 5 weeks, over 1,700 forecasts from those 20 individual users. So our product seems to be working. But the focus is going to be on soccer fans.
Cool. Maybe you can also share a little bit about competitors, to the extent you're going against incumbents versus kind of creating that new market. And so how do you think about that?
All right, I'm going to make this an interactive one to try and wake us all up a little bit. Who here has money on or has used Coinbase in the past? They're right next door practically. What about Binance? About the same amount of people. That's interesting. What about something else? Wow, okay. I'm going to pick on a few people. Remy, I know you. I see some people I know. What have you used other than Coinbase or Binance for exchange of crypto? Oh, okay, yeah. That's a good one. Anyone that used BitMEX? One? Okay, wow. Anyone that's used anything that is you would kind of classify as maybe not decentralized but non-custodial, like you hold the keys to your own crypto? Only maybe 4 or so, 5. Okay, interesting. And has anyone ever been had an account that's been compromised? 1? Okay. Anyone have their SMS number ported before? Me, I've had it. Do you know does people know what I'm talking about? By SMS porting? Okay, good. So these are, to the question of competitors, right? These are all kind of competing platforms, right? Exchanging crypto in one way or another. Also, before I forget, does anyone traded NFTs like CryptoKitties or anything of that sort? Oh, not that many. Okay. So maybe 5 on that one too. So there's a whole, when we're talking about cryptocurrencies or NFTs or just trading these kinds of assets in general, there's a whole slew of solutions, right? And they all come with their pros and cons. One of the core reasons why we got into the space was because we still felt that there was a lot of lack of security, and that the sanest thing you could probably do if you're going to trade a lot of crypto is to, at most of the time, maintain custody over your asset, right? To not keep it on a platform where you don't know how they're protecting it, you don't know what their account access controls are like. You might be using SMS as a 2-factor, but SMS is getting compromised all the time now. All these kinds of things. At the end of the day, to what we saw, a lot of people were trading on something like Binance and withdrawing their coins back into a hardware or software wallet that they managed, and maybe keeping the seed phrase or keeping a copy of the key somewhere else. So we were just saying, why not just trade directly from your wallet and kind of manage it yourself? And on that note, how many people actually do have a hardware or software wallet that they keep stuff in? Okay. And how many of you would say that you mostly try and keep the crypto off of the exchanges, the centralized custodial exchanges, as much as possible? wow, okay, that was more than I expected. So that was a decent amount of people in terms of the people also trading on centralized exchanges or exchanges in general. Yeah, so I mean, we could talk about competitors in this space all day long, but I think that gives you some sense of like what's out there and kind of like our motivations for why we got into the non-custodial decentralized side of it. On the decentralized side, I would say that there's a lot happening at different layers of the stack. So I was at DevCon a couple of weeks ago for Aetherium. There was a lot of talk of layer 1 stuff like protocols, smart contracts, but now there's also a lot of talk of layer 2 stuff and apps on top of that. So there's, what is a competitor? Is a competitor someone underneath of you at the protocol layer who might switch something around on you or go up the stack and try and compete with you? Maybe, right? So there's a lot of other things to consider around like who and where people are competing with you on the stack. But I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, so I'll also be interactive to wake everyone up because it looks like a lot of people are looking at their phones right now. How many people have ever wanted to bet on an asset or an event or used Augur? Okay, only a couple people. So that's kind of the basis of what we're doing and why we're doing it. So we see huge value on being able to create, basically a market on anything, but to actually trade in that market today is very difficult. So if you look at, existing solutions such as Augur or, Gnosis when they finally go live, maybe, the really big problem is that once you get to the platform, you either have an abstraction layer that you have to go through, which is IPFS in order to use, let's say, Augur.casino, or you have to go through some type of, more centralized option, such as Veil, as an example, that shut down, or Guesser. And so if you end up getting past all these steps and you end up getting to a market to actually trade, the cost for trading today on Ethereum is extremely high. And so in order to interact with a protocol like Augur, it's very expensive. And so unless you're doing bets that are in the range of between $10,000 and $50,000 per transaction, the bet that you're going to be placing is not going to be worth it for the fee that you're placing as well with it. And so that's kind of the basis that what we're working towards right now is to provide a very scalable and very cheap way to trade. And so, for our trading as an example, right now, our projected cost is going to be 1,000 times cheaper than existing solutions, also with resolution windows that are 72 times faster than existing solutions as well. And so, although Augur and Gnosis are similar to what we're building in terms of mechanics, what we're building is, you could say, on a different type of stack, and are targeting different types of users. So a user that uses Augur today, they have actively around 25 to 50 users that interact with the protocol, and these users are usually doing large ticket bets. And the reason for this is because either someone has money in crypto which they don't want to off-port through a KYC off-ramp, or maybe they would like to bet on a market that isn't available on traditional solutions today, and so they keep their money in crypto and they keep it on Augur. We're targeting mainstream users, and we're targeting people who want to spend $1 to $100 and be able to bet on all these different assets.
All right. I guess you've raised your hands good enough for the first two panelists. So I'm not going to ask you questions anymore. But let me ask you a question. No, I'm not going to ask you a question. Biggest competitor, I would say not necessarily competitor just yet. But I do know of fact that there's a couple of projects out there, both live and still in the works, that are also trying to tackle gaming and tournaments in place. If you go back in time, 2017, there was this platform called First Blood, for example. They raised ICO money. I haven't kept in track in terms of what they're doing right now, but it's basically like an esports tournament platform as well. But what we're doing is kind of fairly within the ranks of how many of you have heard of Skills with a Z or a Z, however you pronounce it. Skills, right? So it's essentially fairly similar, except that the payout system is monetary, or in a form of gift card, or real life prizes. I don't know, like a toaster, or a computer. I don't think it's too big though, but you know what I mean. But what we're trying to do right now is to just basically focus on crypto, just because it is something that is much more geographically lenient in terms of like where and who can participate. So anywhere in the world, as long as you're playing a game of skills that is integrated with Outplay, you can join a tournament and get paid out in crypto if you wanted to, or just keep whatever that in-game currency that is the equivalent of crypto if crypto or blockchain is not your thing, right? So I think that right now the reason why most of, I would say, competitors are not prominent is because of the fact that the space that we're working on right now is still not very mature when it comes to the gaming space. And so I'm hoping to see more projects that are trying to tackle the same thing. Not because I wanted more competitors, but because I wanted more innovation to happen in the space. And whoever succeeds basically benefits not just themselves, but also the players and the users that are competitive, that wants to participate in tournaments, for example, or sanction their own tournaments if they wanted to.
So my kind of competition breaks down into three main categories. I'll start with kind of the blockchain competition. We have Forte, who ironically had the round led by Canaan Partners, my name. Then we have Dapper Labs, we have Immutable, recently raised, rebranded from Fuel Games, Gods Unchained. Those are probably the three biggest in the space right now and all have God's amount of money. One of the things that I think is the biggest irony in the space is it doesn't matter how much money you have if you don't understand your customer. And the fact that, I'll hype myself up here because I can. The fact that, we've spent the last 14 months talking with game developers and understanding that really they don't want to use blockchain directly, but they don't really care if it's under the hood, but rather they just don't want to be exposed to it. That in itself is something that's gone way over the heads of those competitors, and it's ironic because they're all taller than me. But kind of from that perspective, it's strange that they're taking such a weird direction into the space and with a product that frankly just won't sell, but if Ripple wants to give you more money, who cares? Then kind of there's the other half of the space, which is Steam. We're a competitor with Steam. We have a marketplace. We have an Explorer. We kind of have more decentralized logic, like you can loan from one player to another with our API. Steam doesn't really have that. Our API is also agnostic, so it can be delivered via any platform. Via Steam has to be delivered via their client. But they're another competitor, and then they're even more, like a Discord is a possible competitor with us. And I think they'd be a great marketplace, actually, for virtual goods. So I think, understanding your competitors, kind of where you fit in with them is kind of the biggest thing that I've done kind of from a market research perspective. And answering the questions, because I don't think we've gotten to fundraising, but they'll come. And they ask about all your competitors, those you think that are competitors and those that you've never heard of before.
So for us, it's anyone that's providing sports fans with skin in the game, right? So most people know the term, but it's basically the idea behind you're sitting at the bar, there's a random game being played on the TV, and just by you betting with whoever is next to you, even if it's $2 for the next beer or whatever it is, that whatever outcome is going to take place in the next few minutes, the random game on TV just became very interesting. And so it's skin in the game. It's very easy to think of it in the sense of sports betting or casinos and all this stuff, but it also happens in fantasy sports, for example. It also happens in any other type of competition where people are just trying to compete on really their forecasting skill. And so there's a big gamut or a massive range of competitors, from the big, massive sports books and things like that to very small startups that are trying to do something in the space where it's just really, they're all trying to do the same, which is just become the second screen for sports fans. And so that's really where we are.
Cool. And to the extent you can share, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your fundraising experiences. This space kind of went through bubble and bust. Some people have crazy war chests of money. It doesn't mean that, to Canaan's point, doesn't mean that throwing money at the problem can solve problems. But I was wondering, so what was your fundraising experience, as well as what do you focus on deploying capital on? Or maybe you're staying away from fundraising and focus on traction instead?
Yeah. So some context so you guys can understand where I'm coming from. So I've been in the startup space since 2008 with a different company called Localytics. We built mobile app analytics. I think it's actually mentioned on my slide. And before that, I was a software developer. Quit my job at Microsoft to start that company. But the reason I mention it is because we built that company. We raised about $60 million doing it. I was a technical co-founder. The company is still privately held today. Still going strong, like 100 employees or so, tens of millions of revenue, things like that. So, and there was a lot of ups and downs with that. And there's a lot of parallels to that space, from that space that I would draw here in the blockchain space. But, through that, I lived through like the 2008 housing crash, and what that did to the funding market. We didn't really raise money for like a year or two after that happened. Been through the ups and downs of various dips in the public markets and like IPO booms and busts and things like that. And so I mentioned it because with any market, with any industry, there's always going to be the ups and downs, and crypto and blockchain is really no different. Just kind of the timing is a little bit different. But I also spent 2 years as a venture partner at a VC in Boston, which is where I'm based. And it was a firm called Sigma Prime. And we were doing Series A deals, $1 to $5 million deals in usually like typical software startup stuff. So if anyone wants to talk about fundraising and how to do it and just like advice or wants help with a deck or wants to look at something, I'm happy to, help anybody in this room. Just hit me up after the thing. But in blockchain, just a couple of things I want to mention real quick. Obviously 2017 and early 2018 before Bitcoin crashed was like a totally different world. I was able to draw on my previous investors and connections that I had already for our first round. Our first round was $1.5 million round. We got our first term sheet in December of 2017. We actually kind of dilly-dallied a little bit on closing the round because of some other things that we were working on, but eventually closed it in early 2018. And it was ridiculously easy in comparison to what it is now. Now, there were a lot of what, fair weather fans or whatever you want to call it back then. Every VC was getting into blockchain. Now, a lot of them that weren't really blockchain investors or cryptocurrency or whatever, before the bubble, a lot of them are now gone, like post-crash, right? And they're starting to come back a little bit because, certain prices are on the rise again. But, a lot of the coins that were launched and these cryptos that were launched back then, a lot of them are dead. A lot of people have been burned, so they're not as actively involved. Another thing I'd say is we've seen a very big evolution in just the mechanics of fundraises. Equity versus token sales, the kinds of agreements, whether you're doing like a SAFT. We've seen SAFT agreements. Who knows what a SAFT agreement is? Okay, a lot of people. Good. That has come under a lot of fire from government agencies like the SEC and this whole debate of like what's the security, what's not. Is the SAFT agreement maybe the SAFT agreement is, but maybe the token isn't, and whatever, right? And some of these things are actually starting to get tested in court with like what's happening with Kik and Kin. Who's familiar with Kin? Okay, cool. A lot of people. And there was another company too, the one that just did a Reg A filing. What was that? Blockstack? Yeah, and there was one more. Someone's getting sued right now by the SEC, right? Block One, yeah.
And Telegram is getting halted.
Telegram's getting halted, right? So all sorts of things in the mechanics of a fundraise have evolved quite a bit. Gone are the days of like these kind of like backroom, well, maybe not, but I mean backroom deal like pre-sales at a 90% discount, and then 2 months later the venture people flip it to an unsuspecting public. So anyway, there's a lot of things you really have to think about, and a lot of things have changed. Fundraising in this space has gotten really difficult. It does happen sometimes, and there still are equity investors and token investors out there. You got to know where to find them, and you got to have like a strong and compelling pitch now, and you got to think about your grand, like a bigger play. It's much harder to just kind of raise on like an idea at this point in time. But again, yeah, we could probably talk about that all day, so I'll stop there.
Yeah, I've also had a similar experience with my first project, EveryDApp. It was a totally different landscape, totally different, kind of view from investors, view from users, and the idea basically when I started EveryDApp and kind of got my toes wet in crypto was you saw all these projects raising ICO money. Some projects I was familiar with raised 70, 80, 100 million, and then months later they closed the company and walked away with everyone's money. And you saw this routinely. But what's started to happen now, and it's started to kind of been a product of the crypto market going down in terms of prices, what you see is more traditional entrepreneurs coming to the space, looking for real business models, real addressable markets that really make sense. And so, gone are the days of the vision and we'll raise and we'll have a 10-year time span. And in our space specifically of prediction markets, some of the companies that exist today are very well funded, which really creates the wrong incentive, in my opinion, for a lot of companies. When you do raise so much money and you do have a 5 to 10 year time horizon, your focus is less on getting something to market that's usable, that developers want to interact with or users want to interact with. Your main focus is basically keeping the company alive and keeping the token investors that you've had invest before happy. And so for us, I can't say too much about our current fundraising round, but right now we're in the process of raising. We were actually out in SF a few weeks ago to basically have our first round of meetings for our seed round. And so this was something that was kind of a crazy experience. I booked the flights, I think about 5 days before I flew. We ended up having, I think, 30 plus meetings while I was there for the week. And when I booked the flights, we had 0 meetings on the calendar. And so from a word of mouth tweet that we were coming to SF, we really filled up the calendar, which was great. The main sort of pushback that we had in terms of investors today is how we're going to get developers to build into the right verticals and really attract usage. And this is something that we focus on a lot, not only in our pitch, but also our strategy, is to really go after that with a high passion and intensity. From there, I think the important part is follow through. After you raise, a lot of companies raise money and then kind of dwindle out. And so for us, why we started working with Near is that we have really high conviction in shipping and shipping constantly and on time, which is the same type of trademark of Near is that whenever we talk with investors that invested in Near, they say someone from the team is always up at all hours of the day building. And that's something really important that we saw is that the standard has raised now where projects really need to be committing to actually shipping code and continuing to ship code, whereas before in 2017, you could raise an ICO with just a white paper and a basic website, and then you raise for a 5 to 10 year time horizon.
These are very well put together thoughts, and I completely agree with both what you said. And I think that's one of the reasons why, at the very least, for the first company that I co-founded, which is Alto, we initially thought of doing an ICO. This was late 2017, very early 2018. And we were on the verge of doing a token sale when we decided against it, and instead moved into venture funding instead, equity, because of the fact that, number one, we didn't want to be beholden to token investors who doesn't have as much commitment to you as opposed to, say, for example, an equity investor who understands more of like what your business model is. Back in the days, 2017, Peter mentioned you have a white paper, you have a basic website, you can raise $70 million or $10 million or how much you want to raise, right? It's basically selling the vision first before building whatever it is that you're planning on building. And it kind of diminished that drive in a way for some founders to really build something that's beneficial to everybody because of the fact that they're already sitting on that much money, right? And in a way that sort of like became, that withered down like this year and last year, like late 2018. And, as we know it right now, ICO is, I kind of say dead. Right. There are still other things that are happening, like IEO, Initial Exchange Offering, for example. if that's the route you want to go for. But for us, with Alto in the beginning, we considered ICO, but then opted for a venture funding instead. And now with Outplay, we're doing the same thing with what Peter did, flying over to San Francisco and then basically talking to investors that are not ICO investors, right? Just regular investors. And so I wouldn't be able to say much on our current fundraising just because of the fact that it's still happening and it's still ongoing. But I think that it's very, very important to note that there has to be a team that's already committed to building products. And if not committed to building products, at least already built a product in itself. It's much more tougher, I would say, now, as opposed to last year, where the word blockchain and crypto is music to the ears of the investors, because it's kind of like where, all right, we want to be in the process, we want to be part of this movement. But this time around, like a lot of investors, got burned down in a way, and so it's they're more careful, and so it's very, very important that whatever it is that you're showing up for, there has to be something that's already existing, whether it's a demo, whether it's an existing product with traction, or it's already in place right now with a couple of user base that you have in tow. So yeah, basically I would say that as far as fundraising is concerned, landscape has changed. I think that the honeymoon period is over. I think a long time ago it's been over. And so right now we're going back to that space where, great, we can go ahead and raise venture funding, but if we want to raise money on tokens, I think it's still doable. It's just that you need to create value first on the product side of things before selling out a token that is going to be used for whatever product you're building.
All great thoughts. Many things, go on forever talking about this. To talk about a little bit of my fundraise that I've done probably over the past 2 months, the biggest thing I would say that I thought going into the room was a better product would get me, than my competitor would get me an investment. That is categorically not true. You can have a better product, you can be better looking, but you won't get investment. It's just the truth. They'll always give it to an ex-Facebook exec with no idea and a shitty product over you. That's just the bottom truth. So really, how do you then, understanding that, get an investment? There are 3 things I would say. Number 1, identify a subset of the market your competitors cannot actually compete with you in. For example, indie gamers, both Forte and Dapper Labs have 120 employees plus each. I think maybe even over 200 in Forte's case. They're burning $5 to $10 million a year on salaries plus sponsorships. They can't target an indie developer who would only make them $100,000 a year. It doesn't make them enough money. If that's something your product can do, it's an end that they can't even bother with. So that's one way to do it. The other way is targeting investors that actually know your space, who will understand your product more than just, oh, this is normal cash flow, but actually maybe be able to compare and contrast your product against another. The third is FOMO, and it's really the only thing investors understand. The only way I got an investment was I walked in the room and I said, hey, we're raising $500K, I have $600K committed, tell me by the end of this week if you're in. And they said, we're in. I said, okay, that's great. I may have had $600K committed. It wasn't like a lie, but it was like a soft commit going through due diligence. And so you really have to put up a strong face. If you go in and say, we have no investment, please invest. I mean, no, it won't happen. As much as you may wish it does. So that's kind of 3 things I've learned. I've learned like 50 million other things. Happy to let you in on those. But those are probably some of the biggest 3 I've taken away in the past couple of weeks.
In our case, right now we're just bootstrapping the company. We have been speaking to investors, but in our case it's 2 people in the team. And so time spent talking to investors is time we don't spend on the product. And like I said, we have a beta, a crappy beta, I would call it, with 20 people playing. They actually like it. So the point is that like every hour that we use on the product yields a lot more value, a lot more long-term value for the product or for the company than us talking to investors who, as you've heard from many of these guys, they're all just part of the crowd. And so as they start hearing that someone else invested in this or that someone else liked it, they will all come in. Because the truth is that all investors, especially in the VC space, is like they all know it's a numbers game and that like most of their investments are going to go down to zero. So they just need to make sure they don't pass up on the next big bet, right? So at least from our perspective, it's a waste of time right now. But when we need the money, we'll do it. It's probably when we start growing the team. So,
cool. And my last question is, why did you decide to work with Near or considering working with Near? Is it something on the product side of things, or is it something on just helping out the ecosystem side of things, or something entirely different?
So for us, just being in markets, in trading, in the trading markets of crypto, I think it's just good to be diversified between different blockchains and different ecosystems. Being at DevCon, seeing where Ethereum is going, I like where it's going, but it's definitely clear that it's kind of probably moving slower. Everything in the space moves slower than we all think it will. So, supporting other blockchains, supporting other ecosystems, I think is just like the prudent thing to do in this space right now. It's even something like Bitcoin, even something like Ethereum is still a very nascent space, just kind of like a drop in the bucket from a financial markets perspective compared to other financial markets. So it's diversification really, and you want, and then on top of that, you want to look for projects with real people, as was mentioned before, actually doing work, as opposed to some team that just got like $100 million in ICO and who knows where they are or what they're even working on, right? So Near feels and looks and has the qualities of being real.
Yeah, well said. For us, when we started looking at layer ones, there was a lot of due diligence we did around the technical side, looking at funding, looking at executables, looking at the team. And one of the obvious sort of choices, given our location in Germany, was Polkadot. But one of the things that we get with Near and what we've had from the very beginning is that our relationship with the team is very close, and so we're able to be able to have our sort of eyes and ears open to what's actually happening behind the scenes, which is really rare with layer one protocols. I'll just give an example. My partner Jasper, who's the CTO, he needed a feature pushed out for our demo as we were planning on demoing our app to investors the next day. I think it was 3 or 4 a.m. San Francisco time before we flew. Within 30 minutes, this update had been pushed and was live, and our demo was back up and running. And that type of sort of, conviction that this team has around what they're building, it's really unparalleled in the space. And so when investors sometimes come to us and do DD around Near, we always tell them that not betting on their team is going to be one of their most sore losses that they missed out on going forward. So that's sort of our experience working with the Near team so far.
I echo both sentiments in the sense that this is probably the first time, at the very least for me, working on a specific protocol where there is an utmost understanding and level of interest from what you're building from the get-go up until the very end. I think that that's one of the things that Near is doing, which is actually great, apart from the stuff on the tech side of things, which we are going to be using and thinking of using, at the very least, for Outplay. But I think that one of the biggest things that, one of the biggest reasons why we wanted to work with Near is the fact that they're willing to walk with you in building a product, in identifying the space where things can get successful, and really pushing out something into the wild that works and that has value, not just to yourself, but to the people that are going to use your product. And so having said that, it doesn't take away the fact that most of the products that are out there right now are just committed to, say, one blockchain or a certain protocol, for example. And I think that it's good if you have a product that is blockchain agnostic, and that you got to make sure that at least if that's the case, one of them has to be Near.
Not far. I get it. Okay. So I actually released my product 2 months ago on the Loom SDK. We tried to onboard one of the games we've sold. It has around 10,000 daily actives, and it kind of broke, put it lightly. Really, one of the issues here that we saw early on is, and going back to my previous statements, no one really cares what's under the hood. They just care that it works. So it's kind of on us to pick up, honestly, our failure and find something that didn't fail. We're currently, not on the Loom testnet yet. We're running, or not Loom, near testnet. We're running a near local node. But from our development standpoint, it's running a lot better than we did on a Loom dApp chain. We're also TypeScript natively developers, so we prefer the TypeScript rather than the EVM. But kind of from a larger perspective, and some people have tapped on it here. Having a core, being a bigger fish in a smaller pond rather than just a small fish in a pond no one really cares about is a big deal. I've actually had the pleasure of working in Near's offices for the past 2 months here in SF. And biggest thing with Loom is we needed a ETH send raw transaction function, and they didn't have it, and we'd been asking for it for 6 months, and they actually just pushed it out yesterday. But don't worry, I'm not going back. But having that one-on-one interaction with the team, the ability if something breaks to be like, hey, can you fix this? Why are you doing it that way? Can you give us some insight here is actually very valuable. Also from the wallet perspective, a lot of things they're doing with their wallet and contract-specific access keys, we are kind of doing internally already through, or we were doing it through the EVM, and so we leveraged kind of their technology in the core protocol to do that. So we didn't really have to build it redundantly, what should just be in the core protocol.
I like everyone else. I think first and foremost, it's been the team. We've learned so much from them. I mentioned at the beginning that blockchain is not our native space or not something we really know. We've learned a lot about that from them, but it's also just in general how you think about your product, how you think about launching, how do you think about just the different technical complexities you may go through that may seem more mundane, but it's been a great resource just working with the Near team. And at least from our perspective, it's not so much about what you have today, but things are going to evolve on both sides, both your product, but also the Near team. And so it just makes a lot of sense to partner at this stage and probably moving forward, of course.
We were a little bit longer than expected, sorry.
There's drinks.
Yeah, so we are, my understanding actually, for whoever is available, we're going to go to the bar across the street if you guys are down.